I'm going to tell you a story about a player that I thought was terrible, and yet I managed to sign him to a professional club overseas. Hi, my name is Alan Derrett. I'm a full-time football agent and the co-founder of Australia's largest player agency. We work with over 25 professional clubs across Europe, and me and my team secure trials for hundreds of players every year. Okay, so I may have exaggerated a little bit with that intro. I didn't think the player was terrible, but I definitely didn't think he had enough to make it. And I think this is a pretty important story to tell because a lot of the times the most common question that I get asked by parents is my boy good enough? Or is my girl good enough? What are your opinions? Do they have what it takes to go overseas and make it into professional level, right? And it is one of the hardest questions for me to answer because due part to this story that I will tell, a lot of the times it doesn't really matter what I say or what a coach says here. It really only matters what the player does when they're overseas trialing for that professional club. Highlights don't really matter, your CV doesn't really matter, and just because you play good in Australia or USA or Canada or wherever it is you're playing, doesn't mean you will perform the same way in Spain. And the reason I still believe that with my heart today is in due part because of what happened with this player. So let me take you to the start. Basically, when I first started this agency, we had one of our first events. So at one of our first events, we had barely anyone attend one of our events. Today we sort of sell out our events, but back in the day, 6-7 years ago when we started doing events, no one really knew about us. And we didn't have that many players at the events. And we brought some professional club overseas to scout players. And basically, the level was sort of very sporadic. This particular player wasn't terrible, but I would say bang average. Like bang average player, state League One, NPL, like just an average player. There was really nothing special about him whatsoever. I think at the time he was 15 or 16. And as an agency, we've always wanted to help whoever, right? We never really put any restrictions on that you have to have this level, or you have to have this many games in NPL, or you have to do this or whatever before we invite you to go overseas or whatever. We never wanted to do that. We've always wanted to make it so any amateur player that wants to try their luck, that wants to go overseas, has a safe way of doing it, goes through a proper system, and can have access to direct trials, right? And they can avoid all the other bullshit that's in the industry. And when we were starting that early conversation with Dad, and I was like, look, I want to give everyone a go, but I know that these players probably aren't going to make it. And we were very honest with the families, right, with what our opinions were of the players, but we thought, you know what, if you want to give it a crack, we can sort it out. And we did, right? We set him up with trials. He went overseas and he went to trial with a third division club, right? And look, he was there for a couple of months, up and down, obviously a few issues here and there, but he trialed and, without even us pushing much at all. And I know it sounds like I'm discrediting the work that we do, but, there's some cases with players where we push really hard to try and get them something. And there's other cases where we don't really have to push too much and clubs are, knocking on our doors. And this was one of those cases where we didn't really push too much and we got that phone call. I remember getting that text from Dad sort of letting me know. My dad, by the way, works with me in the agency. We built it sort of together and we now have a team of over 10, right? For those of you that don't know. And so I got that text from Dad letting us know that, the club is interested in him and they want to sign him for their under-19s team. And listening to that phone call for the very first time and obviously they offered something very minimal and Marie's dad made sure that he got sort of a full scholarship ride to sort of compete there and to be registered and everything. And what have Heron accepted it, player accepted it, everyone was happy days, and player, right, was signed. And it was sort of our first ever signing, transitioning an amateur Aussie that played State League One, I'm pretty sure, in Sydney to go overseas and sign for an under-19s third division team, but their under-19s were competing in like the second division of under-19s, which is a really high level. And I remember it just shocked us both because we were just looking at each other after that phone call and neither one of us could believe that he got signed. We just couldn't believe that it happened, right, with this player. Like, I think if you send a player that you go, absolutely amazing, he's scoring like 20-30 goals a season or doing this or doing that, or like a killer centre back or blah blah blah, like there is players that come through my program that I know, okay, this guy looks pretty serious, right? And I'll be honest, there's other players that come through and I go, I don't know, right? But I remember it just shifted something in my mindset and it humbled me in the sense of just because I can make an opinion of what I see level wise, or a coach can or someone else can, it has nothing to do with how far that player is going to go. And it fully changed my philosophy of football entirely. And I'm so glad it happened, because it did change my entire philosophy of what building a successful agency looks like. And without this happening so early on in the foundations of the agency, it would have never been created. What I realized in that moment, that 90% of the work is about being in the right place for a magical moment to actually happen. Now, this player, he went on, he played a season, he had a really good few months. Then the coach got changed, a new coach came in, didn't like him, started putting him on the bench, typical football situation. Parents at the same time made him really focus heavily on school. While overseas there, he started missing training sessions. It was a bit of a mess, if I'm being honest, what happened afterwards. And ultimately, the club just, because he missed a few training sessions, this and that, they parted ways and they came back to focus on other things. Because I think mentally he sort of couldn't hack it after a while. When things are going great, it's easy for people to sort of be living the dream. But obviously when there's little hurdles, a lot of players tend to sort of shit the bed, which is it's life. But the point that I want to make is that I think it's so important to have that exposure. It's so important to just throw yourself into the abyss when you're going overseas for these trials, when you're doing anything, because anything can happen at any moment for any player. And it's almost arrogant to, as a coach or an agent, make an opinion prior to the player having that chance, because at the end of the day, our opinions don't matter. It's really only the club's, and everyone's people. We're all people. We all have human error. We all make mistakes, and we all have preferences and things we, don't like as well on the other side of that card. And you never know, you might send a player that you potentially don't even think is good enough, like I did overseas, and you never know, like a player that I didn't think was good enough here, I still did the work. It's the same work that I'd do for any player, right? Because I treat everyone the same. They go overseas and they perform or whatever and almost blossom as a player, and bang, it happens, right? And so complete mindset shift. And I'll have players that I send over and they'll be on trials, with different clubs, and they'll tell me all the time that they've been approached by another agent while training or while, after a game or something like that. And, when people tell me that, that first phone call or text message, them trying to be honest or being upfront with me about it, my recommendation always to that is, if they can offer something better than me, take it, right? This is just business, and at the end of the day, I just want the best for my players, regardless if I can provide it or someone else can. The thing is, I say that not to encourage people to screw me over, but because I'm very confident that I am amongst the top 1% when it comes to agencies across the board, and I know that likely they can't offer what I can. And I've had clients go away and they try tournaments or they try other academies or maybe another agency. The funny thing is, 80% of them always come back. There's not a shortage of players, but there is a shortage of good agencies. The point I tried to make with that little bit there is, you're not going to have an agent approach you in Australia, but being overseas and having that exposure, which is really the main purpose of this video, it's the stuff that changes football lives, right? So if I can leave you with anything in this video, the biggest thing would be, opinions are opinions, everyone has one, and not everyone's going to see your level the same way you see it. The second one would be, don't wait for exposure, go out and find it for yourself. You need to create your own exposure.